All right, so our coilovers are in for the GXP, and we're gonna go ahead and take a measurement with the stock suspension, and then come back out and do another measurement with the coilovers on. So the fronts on the stock struts are sitting at 28 inches, and the rear is sitting at 29 inches, just below 29 inches. So let's go back to fix the rust bucket garage and put these coilovers on. All right, so here we are back in the garage with our coilovers, our 2 rear coilovers and our 2 front coilovers. We ordered, that came with the rears, new plates and the 2 sway bar links that you'll need. These coilovers are from Megan Racing. With that, we're going to go ahead and get into installing the front, and then we'll go into the rears. So in order to pull out the old stock strut and install the new coilover, we're going to have to disconnect the outer tie rod, pull the brake caliper off, the sway bar link has to come off, and the hub nut will have to come off. That way we can get to the strut bolts here, removing that. When we're done with underneath here, up on top, and remove these 3 holding the stock strut in here, and drop that out inside the wheel well, and then reinstall the coilover. So for starters, we'll go ahead and start with removing the outer tie rod that's attached right here to the knuckle. That out of the way. Move over to our hub nut. The hub nut off. We can go to our sway bar link now, and we're going to go ahead and remove the nut on the bolt down here at the bottom. Same thing up top. All right, we'll remove the sway bar link. And move to removing the brake caliper. I got to get something to put. Normally when I'm working on like brakes or something underneath here, we hang the brake caliper from the spring with some zip ties. But being that we're moving this entire strut and everything out of here, I'm going to find something to put, maybe a bucket or something to put brake caliper on so we don't stress out or damage our brake line. That's something. Now we have something to support the brake caliper with it. We'll go ahead and disconnect the brake caliper. that off to the side. Now we can start working on the nuts and bolts holding the strut to the knuckle. All right, with those loose, I get my jack and put the jack up underneath of the lower control arm, taking the pressure off of the bolt going through, and then we can knock them out with a hammer and then move to the top bolts to completely remove the rest of the strut. And we're just going to place the jack on the lower control arm, relieving a little bit of the pressure. And then we'll knock these out. Put a little pressure back on your rotor, wiggling your knuckle on the strut, and you'll be able to pull out both of the bolts. And with those removed, the knuckle is separated from the old strut. We can go back up top and we'll remove the 3 from the top, allowing us to pull this completely out. So up here on the top, we'll just remove all 3 of these nuts, loosening the strut up from the strut tower here. With those 2 removed, I'm going to reach back down underneath in the wheel well, work on the 3rd one, holding the strut up in the air just to make it a little bit easier and not dropping it. Remove that 3rd one out and then take your strut and just pull it out. Now we can go ahead and clean up. I'm going to wipe this up a little bit, just clean it when we can. Check the inside, wipe that down so there's no foreign objects between the coilover and the mount. Okay, so with the old strut out of the way, bring the coilover over, reinsert that through the holes in the top, We're just going to go ahead and snug down with our fingers the bolts for now. We're not going to tighten these three up yet. We're going to go ahead and reinstall everything on the bottom. And then once we have everything reinstalled on the bottom, we'll torque everything back down to specs and then tighten the top three at the end. So that, it's just going backwards of what you did originally, taking it apart. Start with putting the knuckle back in and so on. Jack the lower control arm back up. Continue now to jack it up and line the holes back up. We'll start with the bottom one. Push in on the brake rotor, the top one in, tap them back down. Reinstall the nuts. Again, I'm only going to put everything on loose until we have everything reassembled, make sure everything goes back together. And then from there, we'll go ahead and torque down everything. Get our hub nut back on. Go ahead and we'll do the brake caliper now. Get our brake pads back, put them back in there. I'll switch over to the sway bar link. Get our jack in place to lift up on the sway bar link to get the height to line these. They're not going to, it's not lining up now. So we're going to have to lift the sway bar up to get that lined up inside there. Go ahead and install the bottom part of the sway bar link first. Again, just loose. Get some wood. I'm going to lift up on the sway bar, getting the link back lined up at the hole. All right, so before I go any farther of torquing anything else down and putting the outer tie rod back onto the knuckle, I have the jack holding up the sway bar. This sway bar link is in there, you know, not loose, but loose, and I don't like that. I don't want to drop and put all the pressure, you know, back onto the link and not have these tightened down correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and torque these nuts, both nuts, to the right spec. That way that the sway bar link is in there correctly. Then we can move forward with the outer tie rod, putting it back on the knuckle, and then finish tightening everything up. That one is snug. I'm going to move the jack on the bottom back on the sway bar a little bit more so I can get my wrench in there and socket in there, and we'll snug that one up as well. All right, with the sway bar link back on and torqued, we're going to move back to putting the outer tie rod link on, and then we'll tighten everything down to torque specs. All right, our tie rod's back on. Move over to the caliper bolts. Tighten them back down. All right, so we're going to move to the strut nuts and bolts, torque them back down. So now we move on to torquing back down the hub nut. and then the underneath is done, and we can move to the top bolts, tighten them down. And torque this back down. And with that, that covers one whole coilover on the left front of the car. We'll go ahead and move over to the right front and get that one put on. So here we are on the back. We're going to pull the brake caliper off. Obviously the sway bar link, the coilover kits came with 2 new sway bar links for the rear. They're longer. These won't work anymore. The rear strut nut and bolts we're going to remove. And then if you see over here, the trailing arm that comes down to the middle of the knuckle, we're going to disconnect that, and I'm going to hope with the trailing arm disconnected that we can drop this down, removing the old strut, and pull the old strut out and then put the coil back in. Also, once we have those done, is where we have to mount those 3 bolts of the top of the coilover. So let's get started taking this one apart. I'm going to go ahead and start with removing the caliper to get deeper inside. Set the caliper off to the side. Start with removing the sway bar link now. And we have to get a wrench on the back side of it. All right, got a wrench to hold the nut on the back side. Now we can finish removing the sway bar link. Goodness. Now with the sway bar link removed, we'll go ahead and start working on the trailing arm. Get the trailing arm loose. And then the only thing left on inside the wheel well will be the bolts, nuts and bolts holding the strut mount to the knuckle. Nut off, bolt off, put them to the side. Trailing arm is now loose. And we can work on the struts, nut and bolts. Those loose. All right, I have a jack just holding the rotor up a little bit so when I knock out the bolts and everything doesn't come crashing down to the floor. These knocked out. Do the bottom one. Bottom one's out, and now let's see if we can lower this to get the strut out. Lift up, pull the jack out. Try and lower it that way. All right, so that worked. We're moving the trailing arm and caliper, and we've got that. So now we gotta go up inside the trunk and remove those 3 bolts, dropping this old broken piece of junk out of here. Up inside the trunk is where the top of that strut enters. There's the back dash of the car. To remove it, take this rubber boot, cosmetic. It's a cosmetic boot, so it looks nice in your car. And then there's the 3 bolts, just like the front, to remove the strut from the car, dropping it out into the wheel well. So let me get my helper. We'll go ahead and get these loose and drop this out of the car. All right, with my helper in the trunk to take those 3 bolts out, and then we'll drop this down. All right, so here's the old strut that came out of the right rear of the car, our new coil. We ordered new coil plates for the car to go with these. I'm not going to use I don't want to use the old ones because they're just as old as the car is, from 2008. We just wanted to put new stuff on there. Now, the stock stuff is marked with letters or numbers indicating what side of the vehicle they go on. When you order these, they don't come with any of that. So a quick reference or easy way to figure out which way they go on would be, well, you're going to look at the bolt pattern, the outer edge. So you got a dimple right here, and also in the middle where your shock and strut and everything bolts together. That is formed to fit correctly inside your strut housing up in the fender. So quick look with that. That one's leaning down like this one's supposed to be. These 2 bolts line up, the 3rd bolt lines up, and we have the dimple on this side. So we know that this one goes to the right side, right rear of the car. This one has the dimple in the same position, and that is in the same position, but as you see, the bolt pattern is different. It's the single bolt on this side, the double bolt on that side, not matching this. So with that, we put that off to the side. It's our new one that goes on. We'll mount that. Now the coilovers come with these. They are adjustable, so I guess you could technically spin this around, but ours is set up for, this one's already got set up for the right side of the car, and the other one that's in the trunk is set up for the left side of the car. So that is your sway bar link bolt hole right there. So we'll go ahead and we got to assemble this onto the top of the coilover, and then we can put the coilover back in the car. So now that we've determined which backing plate goes on here, you have your sleeve, slips over top of there. You have 2 different cup styles here. Ours calls for this deep cup. Take your plate, slip it over down the sleeve, underneath of here. Get your spring lined up inside there. If you can see how it's too high, it's not sitting on the spring correctly. So let's get that holding the spring set in there correctly. Now we have the spring in, it's seated in their position correctly on the plate. We still have the sway bar link facing in the right direction. Take our cup, slip it over top of the threads. Our nut with our Teflon locking gasket in there. And we're going to go ahead and tighten this down. If I can get my wrench in the right direction. All right, so with the backing plate on, we'll go ahead and stick it back up inside the wheel well. And the helper's up in the trunk to put the nuts back on here. So, wind up. And my job's easy. I just sit here and hold it while he tightens down those nuts. So we have the 3 nuts and bolts tightened up in the trunk. Now it's just to reassemble everything on the outside, and this side will be done. So I got this on the jack. Just gonna lift this back up into place. If my jack goes up high enough, because these are very short. Same thing like we did in the front, we gotta line these holes up. And I gotta get something underneath of my jack because it is just shy of getting it high enough, so. close. I get these back in. And the bottom one went in okay. I'll get the top one in here. That went in pretty good too. And get our jack out of the way and finish putting everything back together. Again, just like I did on the front, I'm just going to put everything in there loose for now, and then we'll tighten everything down as we go. Now, these are the sway bar links that come with the coilovers that we ordered. These are for the rears, because the ones that were on the rears, I got rid of already. They're too short to get from the sway bar to the coilover. Let me see here. So there's your difference from your stock to the new ones that come with the coilovers. We replaced the front ones with new ones as well. Since we were tearing it apart, we might as well got new sway bar links up front too. Take these and get this on, and then we'll do the trailing arm and the brake caliper. Get these tightened down. Move on to the reinstalling the nut and bolt for the trailing arm underneath. Get the caliper back on. So we have the caliper back on hand tight, the coilover nut and bolts back on hand tight a little bit. The trailing arm underneath is on. Sway bar link is on tight. We're going to torque that in a second, and top up underneath, up inside the trunk lid is done. So let me get my torque wrench. We'll get these all torqued down. And with the trailing arm tightened down, this side's done. We'll go move over to the other side and do the same thing on the other side and get that one done. All right, so I know in the beginning of the video I said we were gonna show the car slammed after we put the coilovers on. We changed our mind. We are gonna be driving it on the street, and there's just too many different variations out on the road with potholes, speed bumps, curbs, things like that. The GXP already runs low as it is on the stock suspension. When we put the coilovers on, bought them, got them out of the box, I believe, if I'm correct, the rears were sitting at 29 inches or something like that, or just under or over 29 inches. Without any adjustments, the rear end dropped down to 27 inches. The front end, we put them on, we were around 28. I think we're down to 27 and a half inches. And that was with no adjustments, you know, fine tuning adjustments. So we're still in the process of adjusting them. Contrary to what you might hear out on the internet, that these coilovers weren't going to be made anymore for the GXPs or the Pontiac Grand Prix. I spoke with Coilover Depot, which is the place that sells them, and I spoke with their manufacturer that makes them for them, which is Megan Racing, and they're not being discontinued. They are continuing to order them. They have them in stock, and they're actually getting more built right now as we speak. So stay tuned for another video. We're going to revisit the coilover video, you know, the coilovers on the car, once we get a little bit more, you know, time on the road and fine tuning and adjusting them to a comfortable level. If you like this kind of stuff, consider subscribing to the channel, hit that notification bell, and maybe giving us a thumbs up. Stay tuned. We'll revisit this later on down the road.